Hello and welcome to the Art Department podcast. We're at episode 58 and we have an interview lined up again for you guys. So it's Emmanuel in San Francisco, it's myself, Jan in Singapore, and our special guest is joining us from a yet undisclosed location. But in
Maui,
I was going to
Hawaii.
say the ISS, but okay. Anyway, I think most of you guys already know who it is, but I'm going to throw it over to Emmanuel to give a really short introduction.
Yeah, so today we have Craig Mullins on, and I guess I might as well just share this quick story that I've shared before, which is, I've known about his work for many, many years, and back in the Sejun days, I had been posting about some painting that I couldn't crack because I really didn't know what I was doing, and it was this underwater painting that didn't look underwater at all. And Craig was part of that forum, and I emailed him my painting over and over and over and over again until he replied one day with no words, but just the painting overpainted, and I totally learned how what I had did wrong, with an example and a paint over from Craig, and that's sort of my first interaction with him. And it's much appreciated because he didn't have to do that, and I was super persistent. So I'm sure, maybe he just wanted to get me out of his hair. Um, but just to say that he's been an inspiration to me even back then. I've since then taken two of his classes at Schoolism. I think like 4 or 5 years ago, and learned a lot from that. And I really want to see what he, have a chat with him regarding some of the topics that we normally talk about, and see what he thought about it. So here's Craig Mullins, given a little bit of a history about himself, as long as he wants, and then we'll get into some chat. So Craig, take it away.
Hi, I'm honored to be here, and thank you to you both for inviting me. Gosh, my history. Let's see. I've had an interest in art and engineering and technical things for as long as I could remember. Um, and my training was at first in industrial design, which combines both of those interests. I went to Art Center, College of Design, 2 years in industrial design, and then like 3 years in illustration. I think the training in industrial design was a lot more structured, and I got a lot more out of that, and the ability or the requirement and idea of being able to delineate things that don't exist was fascinating to me, and how to break things down into their simplest parts, and then apply principles of light and perspective on that to make something that is believable. That was something magical to me, and that's what you get in ID. In illustration, it's more like taking existing things and um, stylizing it, or pushing I guess a point of view with an image. I didn't really get into that too much. Um, so I was trained before digital tools. There were Macs with McPaint in the early 80s. I actually have some of those paintings still. They still exist, like paintings done in like 1982, when I was, how old would I have been in there? 18, 20? And it's funny because it actually looks like me. You can tell that who did them. Um, but 8-bit art, uh, was not very useful for commercial illustration. So I was trained traditionally at Art Center. And about, I would say, 5 years after I graduated, Photoshop and 24-bit color came along. and we were using Photoshop to mostly photo bash, because that's what Photoshop is designed to do. The idea that you could do a painting from beginning to end with only digital tools and drawing with a mouse, nobody's really trying that. So just over the time, I kept on beating at it and beating at it and said, well, you could do this, you could do that. And adapting some more graphical techniques from gouache painting um, to digital medium, that seemed to work out pretty well. It was extremely difficult to try to imitate oil paint, but you could imitate gouache. So that worked out pretty well. And I just kept on doing, these goofy little paintings, and then the Siegen days came along with a whole bunch of really talented young people, very energetic, all came together, and we kind of figured it out, how to paint with this new medium. And so since then, all kinds of innovations have happened in the digital world, such as photo bashing and 3D sculpting. Um, and I've been looking at all of those um, technologies as they are either a tool, a hindrance, a handicap. To a certain extent, the way I look at it now, I mean, I've tried photo bash, paint bash, 3D, every conceivable way of working. I'm always changing how I do things to see if it fits my end. And I think in 2006, when ZBrush came out, I said I have to learn 3D or I will be out of a job, similar to 2D animators. But then I thought, it really doesn't necessarily need to be that way. If I became a better 2D artist, if I took all the time that I spent screwing around with Photoshop and actually learned how to draw well, I could probably do this in a more unique and personal way than people using ZBrush. Because I think that the more complex and powerful the tool, the more that bleeds the individual quality of the artwork out. And so, strangely enough, ironically enough, that so many young artists went into that now, I rededicated myself to 2D, anatomy and drawing. I still have a long way to go. Um, but now people who are really good at 2D are getting more rare because of the time investment involved, decades sometimes. So that's kind of where I'm at now. Is the way I like to work now is no photo batching, no 3D. I try to use the digital tools actually in a pretty limited way because I want more of myself to show through that and what I've learned over the time period. But, when I was a younger, obviously I'm going to use these shortcuts. And in the end, it probably slowed down my development as an artist, but it did have short-term benefits, to which I'm grateful for. But I've had to kind of go back and fill in holes in my education that possibly 3D or photo bashing filled. And so that's kind of where I'm at now, is I'm trying to simply become a better artist and trying to use the tools in as a deliberate um, and smart a way as I can. So that's where I'm at now.
Awesome. And when you say become a better artist, like is it like a fine artist you're looking like
I
what
don't
does
make
that
the
mean?
distinction
Yeah. Oh,
between
okay.
fine art or illustration. It's just more solid, better drawn, better designed, just better foundation.
Like what kind of art, like at the end of it, what kind of art really speaks to you? Like is this like, hey, I really want to do this kind of a painting, that kind of a painting, or this genre or that genre, or is it just whatever I feel like today?
Well, to a certain extent, I mean, my main influences earlier in my artistic life were Sid Mead and John Singer Sargent. And I think my earlier work probably looked like a bastardization of both those. But I think over time, as you work over the years, go off in different directions. Like, I've seen people start out doing digital work that looks a lot like mine, and then they go off in directions that I wouldn't have gone. And I think that's great. I mean, everybody starts from somewhere. So yeah, I think it's also one of those things, like when you're a younger, less developed artist and you need to put something out to a certain technical level, the seduction of imitating a more established style or artist, it makes sense from a lot of different um, angles. But eventually, you'll probably want to go do something that is only your own genre, your own style. But that takes decades. And so that's kind of, where I'm at, is just trying to have my own voice. And I think that I got into really big trouble, and I think it speaks to the idea of burnout. I think it was probably 2006, or right around the time I was thinking, oh God, I've got to go ZBrush or be out of a job. That while a ton of people started getting into digital painting and art and doing some incredible things, and things that I couldn't do or even conceive of. And I would look at their artwork and say, "That's what I got to do. That's just amazing." And I would try to, like, if they were sitting in front of me, I'd eat their liver to get their mana or something like that. But the thing is you can't be somebody else. Not in the long term. And probably the way that you look at your art is not rational. It is not accurate. I look at my art, I dislike it intensely, but I see from other people's reaction that it's not as bad as I think it is. So I have to realize that that is an illusion. And that if you really do try to do things, instead of looking at the world through other people's artwork, look at the world and how you react to it. I mean, this is just something I'm getting better at now that I'm almost 60 years old, because I definitely fell into the trap earlier in my life of looking at other artists and saying, "Oh, I just want to do work like that." And as I say, that is very understandable. It's a bit like the dark side. It is a shortcut to short-term power and results, but in the long term, it probably isn't good. But it's all part of the process of the growth of an individual. So it's not something that's should be looked down upon. When I see a 20-something person working in a particular style that may not be their own, I don't say, "No, you got to go develop your own thing right now." I said, "No, this is great. I know that they're going to. That is the progression of an individual through their life." So, anyway, what was the question?
No, it was just basically like, because I think I read on your Twitter that you're wanting to illustrate some fantasy uh, things, and I just wondered, if that was something that you've always wanted to or gravitate towards, and where all this art is culminating
Oh,
to is your ability to do that,
well,
basically.
I think on that Twitter thread, I said I wanted to illustrate Wagner's Ring, and
Mhm.
um, yeah, I mean, Arthur Rackham, amazing English illustrator, did a folio of drawings for The Ring, 150 years ago, and I've always loved those drawings. I mean, I wouldn't work in that style or that idiom. I would go back to the music itself. Um, but yeah, that I love opera. The Ring is for people who don't know, it's 4 operas over 4 nights. It's about 16 hours long. Um, the saying "It ain't over till the fat lady sings" comes from the fourth opera of the series. So the Teutonic, with the uh, horns on the helmet, it comes from the Ring cycle. Um, so if you haven't ever heard Wagner, I I think somebody once said that Wagner's music is better than it sounds. So which I always thought was a
Oh,
funny way of putting it. Um, but yeah, I think that I am an illustrator. That has always been my reflex, as opposed to, I don't know. I guess I look at it like all, in music there is, like, say like Johann Strauss's The Blue Danube. Okay, that's what they call program music. That is music that has an association with something in the real world. Okay, then say go to Chopin and you know one of his mazurkas or something. Well, that's completely, I mean, it's a dance, but there's all kinds of music that has no association with pictures or images or anything. It exists in the abstract. And I think there always has been a little bit of snobbery toward program music as opposed to absolute music. But um, in the fine art world, yeah, this painting exists in a vacuum, and is its own universe, as opposed to this is an illustration which is connected to something else. At its lowest form, it's connected to selling something, but it may or may not have a life beyond that. I think that Norman Rockwell's work was selling something, was selling a magazine, but it has a life after it because it had depth to it. And when an illustration continues to live long after the original product has faded into past memory, that's really something. Then it, I think, starts to get into the realm of fine art. Um,
hmm.
so I guess
Wow,
that's
that's
kind of
interesting.
in the back of my mind as a goal. I'm trying to do as good a work as I possibly can, and maybe the work will have a life beyond that for which it was created. Uh, I don't know if it
Mm,
will or not. Probably not. But you take an illustrator's life work. I mean, you take any artist's work. It's always fascinating to take all the work and put it in a folder and look at all the thumbnails. Because if you just come across a new artist and you see one image, you're always kind of interested. I wish to see another image by this person. And does the next image look just like the first one? Well, it has similarities, but sometimes um, you see the totality of it, and each individual piece supports the other. And there's kind of you get what this person is thinking about, and the depth that they look at things, as opposed to just seeing one image. So it is, I think it's important to look at an artist's entire work. A painting by an artist does not exist by itself. It has to be looked at uh, in the context of their other work.
interesting. Do you have anything,
I
Jan,
was just
that you
wondering,
want
and we're talking a lot about art and that kind of stuff, which is great. I'm interested though to hear a bit more about um, Craig as the person versus Craig as the artist. That's always what interests me. So I was wondering, and I mean we've talked a lot about again where you came from and stuff like that, but maybe. I was wondering if like going back a couple of decades was like did you know from the get go that you had to go to art center? Like was that your number one wish and it came true, or were you like was that kind of like a last resort kind of thing? Um, and what did like more in terms of like what happened after Art Center? Did you get a job right away? Was it always smooth sailing, or were there times where like you were like, okay, this art thing is not working, and I should really become an accountant or something like that? I don't know. Um, so I want to know those kind of things as well.
Okay. Well, um, I think if you look at traditional illustration, it was for advertising, it was for magazines, it was largely broken into advertising and
Mm.
editorial. And oddly enough, neither one of those disciplines exists anymore. So I wanted to become an artist, and then, don't have to go into it, but your parents say, well, how are you going to make a living? Well, there is such a thing as illustration. And if I'd known at the time, well, actually, there is no such thing as illustration. Advertising and editorial, they're gone. So I was going into a meat grinder and not even knowing it. Um, and the decision to go to Art Center, you have to understand. I mean, there was no entertainment design. There was no game industry. It just didn't exist. And they would later hire me was an unknown to me at that time. But my dad, I spent 2 years in a liberal arts college, and my dad said, look, you're wasting your time. You're going to get out of there and be completely unemployed. So I think one night we were at a restaurant, and he had like a few too many highballs, and he said, look, you gotta, you like cars, you like technical stuff, and you like drawing and art. What does that combine? Industrial design. Okay, what's the best school for industrial design? Let's look it up here. Art Center. Oh yeah, a place where they do cars. And the decision was made.
Wow.
So that, and then I went through both programs. I was there for quite a long time. And I remember, I think after my first year and a half, 3 semesters, I had 3 instructors come to me and say, you really should go do something else. You don't have any ability with this at all. And
was that the design portion or the illustration portion?
that was in the design program. I was quite weird and off the wall with things that I would do. It's really kind of strange because I find that my artwork, my illustration, is an anachronism. It is very traditional and backwards looking. It's very 19th century. But the things that I would design in the design classes were really kind of strange and out there. But the instructors that I had in the basic classes, perspective, drawing, how value works on things, I suppose wasn't too impressive to the teachers that I had. And my grades weren't that good. So I kind of said to them, look, I got no place else to go. I don't know what else I'm going to do. So I persevered. And I think I went back home for a semester and worked my ass off for 4 or 5 months. And I came back to Art Center and then was doing very good work that I think people started to acknowledge. I don't think I ever got a scholarship. It was always funny because everybody would put together a portfolio of their work and give it to a review committee, and then they would award scholarships on the basis of merit, not need. And so I did that, and they never gave me a dime. I don't think. I don't think they ever did. So, the scholar. I mean, I was doing better work, but clearly not. Probably not even the upper 50% of the class. So that was unfortunate. And the fact that I've been able to make a living at art and illustration, I thought that I was pretty much giving up a family or ever owning a house, that I wanted to do this, or I really didn't have anything else that I could do, that I would never have the trappings of a middle class life. I was always going to be a starving artist. But the fact that I can support myself with this is really quite amazing. And I of course, owe that all to the gaming and the movie world, who are now employing artists like me in ever increasing numbers, now to the point where it's absolutely insane the number of people that are getting into this world. It's like the ubiquity of gaming. Everybody has a computer. They love gaming. I think I want to draw creatures and design games. How many accounts do they have on ArtStation now? Isn't it like in the millions? I mean, it's like a significant percentage of the people on the planet all want to do this for a living. And, people are always saying, well, West artists need to unionize. I don't really know how practical that is. I mean, obviously there is a downward pressure on prices because of a huge oversupply of artists, and really good artists. So I'm not sure how effective unionizing will be, but it's certainly a something to think about. Because I do know that prices, at least in the gaming world, and at the initial part of the gaming world, they were hiring people out of the movie business wholesale and paying extreme prices because the gaming world and market was very immature. And now things have definitely stabilized. Prices have dropped by a factor of 10, and they're hiring people on pennies on the dollar from what they were in, say, 2005, when they were trying to get things off. But the movie business is a long-standing mature market, so it's always been uh, prices have always been pretty low in that, because everybody wants to work on movies. If you try to organize or negotiate higher wage, they'll say, well, we're going to get somebody else. We have a list of 5,000 people here that would love to do what you're doing. And yeah, that has, so it is supply and demand, as the market will show its force regardless of how organized you may become.
Yeah, I mean now artists are turning to NFTs, as part of that overflow, because I think there's like you said, there's an overflow of artists, and now NFTs are a thing, or they are, were, will be, who knows. But you know and I know you kind of recently got into it. I mean, is there any particular reason that you got in now? Anything you want to talk about there?
Well, I think the reason why, that in the time period that I've been doing commercial art, I've seen many different attempts at selling illustration as fine art. I remember in Santa Barbara, I saw there was a storefront that was had Drew Struzan prints, and even some originals you could find, um, and people tried to sell them as fine art for people's walls. It never really went too well. If you go to ha.com, Heritage Auctions, not only do they have super high resolution reproductions of Leyendecker paintings, which are so awesome, um, but you can find all kinds of artwork and posters from popular culture that are being bought and sold on the open market, and for not very high prices. Um, so when I see Beeple sell something for 70 million, and he's an illustrator like me, it tends to get one's attention. So I think, like, okay, are for some reason the clouds have parted at this moment in history. Forces that I do not understand are all aligning so that all of a sudden illustrators are hip for 10 minutes. And of course, now that's all gone. So, yeah, that tends to get your attention. That has in fact happened. And I know Mike he wants his work to live forever, and he thinks that the association of his artwork with crypto or NFT is a temporary one. And that's kind of the way I look at it, is, okay, there is a difference between using crypto and, well, specifically an NFT as a certificate of authenticity. And, people say, well, it doesn't really prove anything. This is absolutely true. And I think what people are really reacting to is the corruption of the fine art market to begin with. That it's been a total cesspool forever. And just look at how interests are aligned when you have a painting of unknown origin. The seller, the buyer, and the expert all have great incentive to say that this thing is real. And it's a total pyramid scheme and a greater fool theory. That is the art market. Crypto has nothing to do with that corruption. So the idea of crypto being really bad for the planet, well, it doesn't have anything to do with the art markets. And I'm not speculating on crypto. I I minted one NFT, and that single entry in the ledger, I don't think is killing massive numbers of people. Some people have said, well, because you're a high profile artist, more people are going to get into it, and selling their art as NFTs, that's fine. I definitely agree. People spamming and pump and dump schemes and selling dubious quality material purely on speculative basis, yeah, that's really ridiculous, and it's self-correcting because it will go away because it is a scam. There's no value underneath it, so the bubble will burst and it will go away, and what we're left with is an NFT, which is a new way of I think it's an additional tool for experts. It's one more reinforcing piece of authentication of what something is. So that's totally fine. Um, but yeah, I've gotten so much negative opinion about extreme hyperbole about destroying the planet, and but the aspect of the fine art market that it's simply helped along by the involvement of crypto, it's very small. It's a different activity than minting 10,000 editions of a bouncing ball or something. That's clearly that is meant to make somebody rich very quickly, and if somebody invests in that, well, I don't see how their stupidity becomes the responsibility of the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, yeah, NFTs, it's simply a tool, and I know that Ethereum has been promising POS since time immemorial, since they were first out. But these are technical engineering problems that will, I believe, be solved. And I think the downturn in crypto is more a response to what's going on in the larger world economy. And we're up against demographic forces that are possibly upending the free trade world order, and we might be looking at an extended recession globally, and interest rates are going up, and yeah, obviously people are looking for more stable assets from the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, did you also get in because you were thinking, hey, maybe this can help, maybe help you become free of having to work for somebody and be able to do it for yourself and do whatever you wanted. Was there any part of that rung true to you?
Well, sure. Yeah, absolutely. If you have an asset that is either worth $1 or $10 million, you should probably convert that into another form as quickly as possible before the market condition changes. That only makes sense. Um, yeah, I just don't really see the difference between traditional fine art markets and one that has crypto grafted onto it.
Hmm.
Because if I would have seen Beeple sell at Christie's, which is a traditional uh, um, art house, he could have sold that for dollars with a certificate of authenticity, and it would have been exactly the same thing. But who knows whether or not crypto's involvement in that changed the calculus of why he uh, became a um, such why that auction was so high. Um, I've heard people speculate about, oh, it was used to prop up a certain cryptocurrency. Well, it's possible. Um, I don't think the whole thing is a scam, although I mean, it is such a wild west that there is, yeah, about 95% of it is utter scam because there is no value underneath any of it, um, which is that's really too bad. But as I say, that is self-correcting. That will go away. And I hope people are not as stupid as to invest in a picture of an ape thinking that they're going to retire, because there's no value underneath it. I mean, how is that difficult to see? So, if people want to speculate on, my stupid painting, uh, that's on them. I offer it. I'm not saying to anybody that you should. I'm not even having. There is, I think, a rational argument to value, um, whereas a lot of the other speculative stuff there is not. So it's probably a better longer-term investment when you invest in something that has some type of deeper connection to the larger culture. It has an influence to it, because that's what makes value in art, is how much has it influenced what comes later. Say, for instance, the 19th century academic painters like Bouguereau, and beautiful paintings. But what came 50 years later? Well, the Armory Show and Cubists and Expressionists. So that was a dead end. And you could pick up a Bouguereau in 1950 for $1,000. Why? Because it did not influence what came after it. But a Brock, from 1913 is worth 100 million. And because it was a seminal piece of a current in the culture that has become dominant. So that is, I think, a rational argument to value. Whereas, the rest of it, the crypto bros saying, "Hey, man, we're all going to get rich." It's like the Keystone Cops all holding on to each other, hovering over the cliff. They're going to start to drop one or the other. So in that sense, I haven't felt, this horrible guilt about offering an NFT for sale, because I'm simply offering something at auction. And if it does well, that means that somebody thought that it had some value. I certainly hope that they're not. I mean, and if they are buying it on speculation, well, I think that is rationally based, but it may not. But again, that is on the buyer, not on me. You can offer anything for sale in the world, and is the responsibility on the person that is putting something out there and possibly selling it and with ridiculous hyperbole? Is that immoral if there are idiots out there willing to buy it? That's an interesting question. The answer to that may be yes, and I think most people on the left would say yes, and most people on the right would say no, and that's I think that's the basis of a lot of the wars you see on Twitter about this stuff.
You have any thoughts on that, Jan?
No, I feel like I'm still struggling to find what to do about this whole NFT space, and I don't have any better answer for that than Craig does, to be honest.
I don't think anybody does,
I
really,
don't know
to be
about
honest
that,
with you.
but it's a crazy world.
I mean, we are in a crazy, crazy time now where there's so many of these new things that are popping up left and right, with NFTs and then the recent thing, the whole AI stuff. I mean, that's a whole thing now. I don't know if you had a question there, Jan, that you wanted to sort of bring in, or something else you wanted to
I
talk
mean, I think
about.
AI is interesting, but I mean, kind of judging by what Craig said earlier, I feel like we have a good idea of what he would say about it, in terms of it being another kind of like tool, another kind of thing. Or I don't know, Craig. Maybe you disagree, and maybe you think AI will have a bigger impact than any of these fads like 3D and photo bashing. Have you kind of played with it or kind of thought about it?
Oh yeah, I've thought a lot about it. I've thought a lot about, and I'm not surprised with going on, and that people. Well, let's go back a little bit. Like you look at Deep Blue and how they taught it to play chess through teaching it every conceivable opening and chest that you could manage, and then it would brute force its way through possible moves from that point forward. It became a really strong chess player. Then they taught it to play Go, and the way that was done is adversarial. They had two machines playing against each other 10 trillion times, and it learned what works. And I think the traditional description of AI is, well, it's mechanical. It uses brute force to simulate complexity. But I was struck by the commentators on the Go match looking at the AI playing and saying it was stunningly original and beautiful as to what it was doing. And that is not what we've always kind of stereotyped AI to be. And now with the advent of AI art coming along, and I, like you guys, the first time I saw what it was doing, I was like, holy shitfuckers, that's incredible. But now it kind of looks like filter art to me. I can, like I was saying, like with a whole bunch. With ours, you put a whole bunch of AI images in a folder, and then you put one or two by a human being, and you can spot the human being. I mean, it's extremely narrow at this point, but we're at the absolute beginning of this. And I do have a rather deterministic view of what human nature is. I don't think magical about what is encased in our skulls. Therefore, that means it can be simulated and duplicated. I think that AI eventually will be another way of human beings to reproduce themselves besides their sexual organs. And that AIs will not have spirituality, but I don't think, well, they might, but I don't think there's anything magical going on. So will you be able to build an AI Mozart? Yes, absolutely, because it learns the same way that we do. It goes out into the world, understands things, and puts them together in a certain way, and eventually it will become very much like us. It will pass any Turing test that you can throw at it. But as far as like an AI living a life for 50 or 60 years, yes, it's going to have to go out and see things and almost live as a human to have an experience and react to things the same way. But another aspect of humanity that I think is not part of this equation is the lower brainstem, the will to power, dominance, jealousy, greed, anger, self-preservation. Those things are not part of our rationality. They're part of something that lives at the bottom of the spine that an AI would have no need for. It would have no need to develop. It simply wouldn't be part of it. But I am worried that. So, and then one reason that's why I'm not really worried about AI taking over the planet or destroying humankind. It would have absolutely no reason to do so, because we are assuming self-preservation is part of it, and it's not. But if somebody starts using AI in the context of war, then they're going to have to harden it survivability, and they probably will give it self-preservation. Just to serve its function better. And that could be a problem. So anyway, those are some thoughts on what I see in AI. I don't think anybody has to worry about it. But I do think that AI, not just concept artists are going to be out of a job, but game designers, everybody will be out of a job. And in the long term, that's great, because it's going to automate, and that will be eventually a huge increase in wealth for every human being alive. The money does slosh around, and it will give us the freedom to. I mean, the overall, like people have observed that some of the poorest people living in developed countries today live better than the French king did in 1500 because of the increased wealth. And think about how increased wealth and better means of production and efficient corporate allocations of capital has allowed the world to support concept artists of all people. I mean, that's quite amazing. So in the long term, I think that AI is going to be a net benefit as long as somebody doesn't, give it the wrong brain parts.
Okay, so you go
I mean,
ahead.
that's ultimately, sorry, that's ultimately the outcome of sort of AI. But I guess a question would be, well, what would you say to because a lot of people are feeling like, well, it's taking over the industry, but it's also doing it unethically because it's sampling a lot of different people's
That's what
work.
human beings
Uh,
do. I mean,
uh, you mean
so like
like
people
photo
people
bashing
that
and all
say
that
that
stuff?
is like, okay, did you invent taking a two-dimensional surface and dragging a contrasting abradable material across it to simulate three-dimensional space? People, oh, you invented that. Well, why don't you trademark that? So yes, obviously it's learning from other artists, but oh yeah, I just get kind of tired of that type of very reflexive fear of just everything that's changing. It's no, that's how human beings do. I started my life wanting to paint like Sid Mead and John Singer Sargent, and did I use their way of thinking, their mannerisms, their shape design, their whole way of doing things? Absolutely, I did. But I did move on from there, which is, as I said earlier on, that's the way things should go.
Fair enough. Would you use AI art? I mean, would you, if it's this tool that generates some results that you were saying, wow, that would you use it?
Absolutely. I haven't really, I mean, I played around with it just a little bit here and there. And I did put a painting into there, and it did something to a castle that I thought was interesting. And it's very similar to like, a 3D package spitting out a render, and like, okay, how it understood light on that form is not how I would have done it, but I think it's interesting what
Hmm.
happened. So I'm going to use that. Now, would I use it directly in the painting? Perhaps 15 years ago I would have. I wouldn't. I would simply take that conception and include it into my own, and then draw and paint it in a more traditional way, directly with my hand.
Hmm.
I wouldn't let,
Yeah, sorry, Jan,
No,
you were
I was
saying
just gonna
something.
again
Oh,
drag us
sorry.
away from the art talk, and I was gonna say like, okay, so the like I don't know, like it's Tuesday, and the AI has done your commercial work for you. It's 9 a.m. and you're done with the tasks for the day. What do you do besides art? Like, I don't know, like, let's say you get rich with NFTs next week and you have $100 million. Would you still, I don't know, would you still do art?
I, 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 I believe I would. Yes, absolutely. Um,
And then it,
Yes, yeah. There's no doubt, but you can never really. Um, I think putting yourself in the shoes of somebody with those resources and how that distorts your
of
personality.
course.
I don't think anybody can really answer that question totally truthfully until they're there.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Hmm.
I'm just trying to think like, okay, I mean, you have an interest in like classical music, and I mean, you have a family, and out of all places, you moved to Hawaii, right? Um, um,
Yes.
what does that all amount to? Like, is this creating a better environment for you to focus on your art, or was it a kind of, I don't know, was it running away from, I don't know, not having to live in L.A., or how does that all help you create better art? I can hear the
Well,
birds, so that's a nice environment.
oh yeah, and they do that in January too. Um, Yeah, Hawaii is a fascinating place. I've wanted to live here since I was about 15 or 16. I kind of decided that that is where I wanted to be. for a whole bunch of reasons that are rather complex. Um, uh, but yeah, I mean, I think getting into Hawaii as a place and what makes it fascinating to me is a little outside of. I mean, that's like a 2 hour
Okay.
topic.
No, I think
But
yeah, go ahead.
I spent like 18 years in
Mm,
LA, and um, and moving here in 2001. Um, I've loved every minute of it.
mm.
It is home, absolutely.
Interesting, interesting.
What do you do there? I mean, is there like I mean, some people would surf, obviously Hawaii, man, it's a typical thing, but I mean, do you enjoy particular things that only Hawaii has to offer? What do you love about Hawaii?
Well, do like windsurfing. Maui is good for that. I've
Awesome.
got
Yeah.
2 acres here where it rains 80 inches a year, and that creates probably a few yards of yard waste a day that needs to be processed. I have organic bananas and um, avos and mangoes and lychee, and so keeping up with all that is a huge amount of work because things grow very quickly here. But the soil is actually quite poor. You can't grow a tomato here because of the extremely high rainfall. The soil is very acidic and leached, and it's basically clay. It has almost no organic content at all. So if I want to grow things that are not tropical adapted to these soils, I have to use a grinder to grind up huge amounts of organic material. I have to change the pH of the soil. It's a big task. But if the boats ever stop, we're probably in pretty good shape here. I'll just chase the chickens around. But I've always thought like if the boats stop here, and by that I mean like the outside world completely goes to hell, um, that the social order would invert. The white collar bankers, technologists, concept artists, they would go to the bottom, and the people who are blue collar would go to the top. And that's a fascinating change to me.
No, that is interesting. But you do enjoy doing that. I
Yeah,
mean, that is a big part of,
I really do like.
your
I
life
like
there.
physical labor. I love being outside. I just absolutely love it. And the house that we're in here, it has no heating or cooling. Um, some part open. Uh, so yeah, it's like living in the womb.
If you do say like you like physical things, physical labor, is it also like if you wouldn't have to do commercial art, would you go completely analog? Like would you go completely to physical media again? If
No,
you didn't
I
have the
not
pressures of
completely. The whole reason why I bought a computer with Photoshop in the first place is because there is a real cost or a risk to trying anything in traditional media. If you have a big stretch canvas and you do something to it, it's not easily reversible. You get media buildup, and sometimes things can get a little gooey, and it's risky and expensive. So the idea was to take color roughs or the finished painting at certain points and change it before committing to the real physical work. So I would still use the computer for what I think it's best at. But I don't know if I would continue painting finished paintings in Photoshop. I'm not really sure about that. I would definitely still use the tools, but in a more supporting way, because if you've painted digitally a long time, just go get yourself some ink and a beautiful brush or some gouache and put some marks down, and it's just like going from 480p to 8K. I mean, the world is so rich. You know, the analog world was just so incredible, and traditional media is so incredible. And it's kind of, it's too bad to me sometimes when I don't know. This is a contradiction because I'm moving towards, you know, using digital tools more as analog, but you know, digitally you have so much freedom. You have an infinite supply of canvases. They take up no space. You can try anything. There is no cost to it at all. That people don't really do that. You know, they because it's so easy to go off in some strange direction. The idea of branching, idea of compositing strange things on top of your painting. I think, you know, Thomas Scholz he's really raised that to an art. You know, really tried to explore what you can do by painting with something other than, I use the paintbrush and I make semi-parallel marks that are longer than they are wide, grouped together, you know, which is just the simplest metaphor in the world. Um, so yeah, I don't know if I would continue to do finished stuff in digital or not. I think I probably wouldn't.
And
Interesting.
another thing I think it's something you mentioned, just to get kind of like my last question out here. I think it's something you mentioned earlier in this episode, and also something you mentioned on a previous interview, that you really dislike your own art, and you mentioned it has something to do with just how we perceive our own art. But you also mentioned that it's often the case that when the client really hates your work, you like it, and if you like it, the client hates it. Sorry, and yeah, if the client likes it, you hate it. So I'm just wondering, like what does art that that is created by you and that you like yourself, what does that look like? Does it exist? Have you ever done that? I don't know.
I don't know. Sometimes I think that being an illustrator and making the compromise to be an illustrator may have atrophied uh, my brain and my own desires or instincts to a certain degree, because I have to live in the world of somebody else's making. Um, so I really don't know how to answer that question. Maybe I am a person without a soul.
I don't know. Maybe it's every artist has to deal with that. Maybe even fine artists who I don't know.
Yeah, well,
Maybe
they
we are doomed
absolutely
to
do,
that.
because they're like doing this painting saying, I like this, but I know this is not going to sell. I mean, to me, fine art is like illustration, but it's a different market and a different way to market, but the pressures are
Mm.
pretty much the same. Unless you are indeed independently wealthy, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, but I don't know. Are those people happy with their choices? I don't know. Probably not.
Who, the ones with $100 million that just do
Yeah,
whatever
I
they
mean, I don't
want?
know. Like, it's
Like,
because people say money doesn't make you happy, right?
yeah,
Is if you could choose to do whatever you want and you don't have to think about the consequences and you create something,
right.
would you still be happy with that, or is that just human nature that you'll never be happy with it and you will always aspire to be somebody else? I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I, felt, like I was saying 15 years ago, when I wanted to be all these other artists who I greatly admired and were doing incredible things. Um, well, but sometimes it you get paid to be somebody else.
Mm.
For instance, on Spider-Man, I was hired, and I spent a lot of time learning to paint like Alberto. That was very interesting. In the end, I came to the conclusion that we actually work very similar. Uh, there's not as much difference as you might think. Um, but that was strange, having to turn out work that looks like somebody else. And it's funny because a lot of his things have kind of crept into my work. a more extreme emphasis on shape. And it's funny how I started out trying to get um, digital tools to look like gouache, which was inherently more graphic and flat. And then working on Spider-Man, that kind of brought that more to the fore, and that was pretty cool because I think it's easy sometimes to get lost in gooey simulations of oil paint and trying to make it look like it just gets it's a little bit like the battle between fancy color and high value contrast. I mean, do you really go with something like comic work that has a lot of value impact to it, or do you go with more HDR, which has inherently less contrast but much prettier color? And shape versus lost edge. I mean, there's a beauty in a lost edge, but there's also a beauty and a super strong, clear, defined, decided upon shape. And kind of going back and forth, and I'm trying to include both that. I mean, how can I get both of these ideas, use both of these concepts at their strengths in my work? So my work may be complex in terms of the paint and paint texture, but within the shapes, the contrast of the paint texture is fairly low, so that the overall shape language is still strong. And that's one way I've kind of found to get the best of both worlds. Does that make any sense? Okay. Yeah, I know
Definitely.
it's a little bit esoteric. I doubt
Okay.
it. But I mean, that's who's listening to this podcast is other artists.
Exactly. Emmanuel, do you have another question you wanted to ask?
I actually do. We've talked briefly about sort of certain, burnout things, and we haven't really gone much into it. I actually want to know, have you ever got to a point where you were burned out, and what happened? What did you do to sort of right that ship?
Yes, I mean to a certain extent, burnout it's a first world problem to be sure. Just stop eating for a while. You'll get motivated real fast. Um, but yeah, I mean to do the absolute best work, because if you try to be at the top of a certain profession, the differences between the best and number 100 are 0.01%. So motivation and burnout are a factor. You know when your improvement curve is so flat. So yeah, I think the cure to me is to get that improvement curve or that learning curve more vertical, and to branch out into other things. And here's a real practical tip: go to Twitter or Instagram and don't really and find work that you really hate, and download it, look at a whole bunch of it. Like I was saying earlier, a whole bunch of thumbnails, analyze how it works. If it's there, it has an audience. There's a group of people that like it for some reason, and try to do some work in that style. Like, say, for instance, velvet paintings of neon velvet paintings of religious figures. you know, Try to do one for yourself. How about super sexy anime girls with giant forelocks? Okay, you may or may not like that, but um, really commit yourself to trying to understand how it works, even though you may not like it. So you're kind of because I do know that what you like in 5 years probably you can't predict right now, and how you develop and how your taste changes. And so why not make that process a bit more intentional, and find something that you're not really into, or maybe I should say not really into it. Maybe you don't understand, and
Mm.
um, go about trying to understand it. This is, so they say, trying to get that learning curve steeper again. If you're a strictly 2D artist, learn 3D. There's so many things that you could learn that are related to art that can really help you get some of your interest back. I think everybody, all illustrators working now, should learn as much about art history as they can, and looking at different cultures, and from that you actually branch out into more traditional history, and that's utterly fascinating. And then seeing how there's connections and how different people living in different places being influenced by, I mean, at its most basic, by geography, you can trace all the way through into the type of art they make at different times. And to me, that makes, looking at art I may not understand or like, infinitely fascinating, because you see those connections all the way back to the physicality of the environment that the people who made it lived in.
Mm.
And yeah, it's like, for instance, the Sargent book that I got when I was a kid. So the author is a guy named Carter Ratcliffe, and it's a big, huge coffee table book. I bet most people have it who are listening to this podcast. How many people have read it? You should read it. It's utterly fascinating. It gives so much insight into who he was as a human being, and I'm sure that a lot of people have had this experience when I know some artwork has spoken to me when I am intrigued by the person who made it. I want to know who they are. I want to talk
Mm.
to them. I want to know everything, like, who was it that created this? Whereas if the art doesn't speak to me, oh, well, I don't know, some person made it. But sometimes you look at it and you're really quite fascinating about where did that come from. And that, like, that Sargent book, I've read a lot of other things having to do with Sargent. There's quite a bit of stuff out there. Even some of his descendants wrote some biographies of him. But the Ratcliffe book is, I believe Ratcliffe is is an art historian and a poet, I think. But it really is quite amazing. You have to read about Sargent's how he got ran out of Paris and ended up in London for the rest of his life. What was around that, and think about your own artistic disasters, and how that happened to him, and how he remade himself doing something completely different, or not completely different, but just starting over from a disaster. Actually, it was a triumph, in retrospect, but at the time it was, you know, um, anyway.
Mm.
Um, yeah. Does that give you some answer to, like, how I look at the burnout question?
Oh, yeah, definitely more than more than I asked for. And I probably have that book, and I definitely didn't read it, which will give me a lot of
I was looking
I
at the pictures,
yeah,
man.
but I will go and read it. No, it does sound interesting, and I think it's so true what you're saying that take yourself out of that hole by learning about other things and reinvigorating is definitely
Yes.
yeah, it sounds really good to me, and it's speaking to me right now. So
Like,
I think that's very
think
powerful.
about, like, analogous colors, right? Colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. Well, think of analogous disciplines and areas of study, things that are right next to art that could improve your art. And to a certain extent, that to me is extreme professionalism, when no detail escapes you. Like, when what would be a peripheral study to art? Okay, how about this? Knowing how manufacturing processes work. Like, when you have a mold, you have to have a draft on it to be able to get the object out of the mold. Okay, so learning about how things are made, how they're assembled, out of what materials, um, that is, to me, up against what the art world is. But if you understand it, I think it will echo through your work and make it more believable, especially if you're making something, you're designing something that doesn't exist. knowing manufacturing techniques and philosophies is going to make it more credible, which is what you're trying to do in the first place.
No, that's absolutely true. Yeah, I can't agree more on
I think
that.
that's a good note to kind of close it out. We're already over an hour. I think
Okay.
it has been a really, really enlightening conversation, at least for me. So I wanted just to thank Craig so much for taking the time to come on this podcast and share all this great knowledge with everyone. Um, and of course, Emmanuel, for being on the podcast and bringing Craig on. Um, and yeah, so if you guys have any more questions, any more feedback, please leave that in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and let us know who you want to see in the future on this podcast, or at least here. So again, thanks to Craig for coming on, and we'll guys see you in the next episode.
All right. Thank you both. All right. Bye, everybody.